Lesson 17. The Washwoman. Let's get going. Do you think old people who are weak and slim should continue working as long as they are able to? Read to understand. Read the story about an old woman who believed in working hard till her death. Find out why it was so. She was a small woman, old and wrinkled. When she started washing for us, she was already past 70. Most Jewish women of her age were sickly, weak, broken in body. All the old women in our street had bent backs and leaned on sticks when they walked. But this woman, small and thin as she was, possessed a strength that came from generations of peasant forebears. Mother would count out to her a bundle of laundry that had accumulated over several weeks. She would lift the unwieldy pack, load it on her narrow shoulders, and carry it the long way home. It must have been a walk of an hour and a half. She would bring the laundry back about 2 weeks later. My mother had never been so pleased with any washman. Every piece of linen sparkled like polished silver. Every piece was neatly knotted. Yet she charged no more than the others. She was real fine. Mother always had her money ready, because it was too far for the old woman to come a second time. Laundering was not easy in those days. The old woman had no faucet where she lived, but had to bring in the water from a pump for the lines to come out so clean. They had to be scrubbed thoroughly in a washtub, rinsed with washing soda, soaked, boiled in an enormous pot, starched, and then ironed. Every piece was handled 10 minutes or more. And the drying. It could not be done outside because thieves would steal the laundry. The wrung-out wash had to be carried up to the attic and hung on clotheslines. In winter it would become as brittle as glass and almost break when touched. And there was always to do with other housewives and washwomen who wanted the attic clotheslines for their own use. Only God knows all that the old woman had to endure each time she did a wash. She could have begged at the church door or entered a home for the penniless and aged. But the old woman did not want to become a burden. And so she bore her burden. My mother spoke a little Polish, and the old woman would talk with her about many things. She was specially fond of me. The woman had a son who was rich. He was ashamed of his mother, the washwoman, and never came to see her. The old woman told this without rancor. One day the son was married. It seemed that he had made a good match. The wedding took place in a church. The son had not invited the old mother to his wedding, but she went to the church and waited at the steps to see her son lead the young lady to the altar. The winter was a harsh one. The streets were in the grip of a bitter cold. No matter how much we hated our stove, the windows were covered with forced work and decorated with ices. The newspapers reported that people were dying of the cold. Coal became dear. On one such day, the washwoman, now nearly 80 years old, came to our house. A good deal of laundry had accumulated during the past weeks. Mother gave her a pot of tea to warm herself, as well as some bread. The old woman sat on a kitchen chair, trembling and shaking, and warmed her hands against the teapot. Her fingers were granuled from work, and perhaps from arthritis too. Her fingernails were strangely white. These hands spoke of the stubbornness of mankind, of the will to work not only as long as one's strength permits, but beyond the limits of one's power. Mother continued and wrote down the list of garments. The bundle was big, bigger than usual. When the woman placed it on her shoulders, it covered her completely. It was fearful to watch the old woman struggling out with the enormous bag, out into the forest, where the snow was dry as salt and the air was filled with dusty white-filled winds, like goblins dancing in the cold. Would the old woman ever reach home? She disappeared, and mother sighed and prayed for her. Usually the woman brought back the wash after 2 or at the most 3 weeks. But 3 weeks passed, then 4 and 5, and nothing was heard of the old woman. We remained without linens. The cold had become even more intense. The telephone wires were now as thick as ropes. The branches of the trees looked like glass. Kind-hearted people lit fires in the streets for vagrants to warm themselves and roast potatoes in if they had any to roast. For us, the washwoman's absence was a catastrophe. We needed the laundry. We did not even know the woman's address. It seemed certain that she had died. Mother declared she had a premonition, as the old woman left our house that last time, that we would never see our things again. She found some old torn shirts and washed and mended them. We mourned, both for the laundry and for the old, toil-worn woman who had more than 2 months past. One evening, while mother was sitting near the kerosene lamp mending a shirt, the door opened and a small puff of steam, followed by a gigantic bundle, entered. Under the bundle tottered the old woman, her face as white as a linen sheet. Mother uttered a half-choked cry. It was as though a corpse had entered the room. I ran towards the old woman and helped her unload her bag. She was even thinner now, more bent. Her face had become more gaunt, and her head shook from side to side, as though she were saying no. She could not utter a clear word, but mumbled something with her sunken mouth and pale lips. After the old woman had recovered somewhat, she told us that she had been ill, very ill. She had been so sick that someone had called a doctor, and the doctor had sent for a priest. She began to feel better. She became well, and as soon as she was able to stand on her feet once more, she resumed her washing, not just ours, but the wash of several of other families too. It could not rest easy in my bed because of the wash, the old woman explained. The wash would not let me die. With the help of God, you will live to be 120, said my mother, as a vindication. God forbid! What good would such a long life be? The work becomes harder and harder. My strength is leaving me. I don't want to be a burden on anyone. The old woman muttered and crossed herself and raised her eyes towards heaven. Fortunately, there was some money in the house, and mother continued out what she owned. I had a strange feeling. The coins in the old woman's washed out hands seemed to become as worn and clean as she herself was. She blew on the coins and tied them in a kerchief. Then she left, promising to return in a few weeks for a new load of wash. But she never came back. The wash she had returned was her last effort on this earth. She had been driven by an indomitable will to return the property of rightful owners, to fulfill the task she had undertaken.